The colony ship Ardent Star was on fire. Not the small kind of fire that engineers could fix with foam and a steady hand. This was the kind of fire that ate through walls, that turned metal soft, that made the whole ship groan like a dying animal. Smoke rolled through every corridor in thick black clouds, and the emergency lights had already switched to red, which meant everyone still alive had maybe 15 minutes before the ship broke apart completely. Nora Webb was running. She was not a soldier. She was not a pilot. She was a ship engineer who fixed broken pipes and faulty wiring, and right now none of that mattered because the only thing she was carrying was a baby strapped to her chest, and the only thing she was thinking about was getting him out alive. The baby's name was Sam. He was 8 months old, small and warm, with round cheeks and dark eyes that watched everything with a kind of calm that made no sense given the situation. His parents had worked on Deck 4. Deck 4 was gone now. Nora had been the one holding Sam when the explosion hit, and so Nora was the one running with him because there was no one else left to do it. She turned a corner and nearly ran into a wall of smoke. She pulled her shirt up over her nose and kept moving, counting the doors by memory because she could barely see. She knew this ship. She had worked on it for 4 years. She knew every pipe and every panel and every shortcut, and right now that knowledge was the only thing keeping her moving in the right direction. The evacuation bay was on level 2. She made it there in 3 minutes. The bay was chaos. People were pushing and shouting and the pods were launching one after another with loud metallic bangs that shook the floor. Nora got in line and moved forward fast, and when she finally reached the front a crew member looked at her and then looked at Sam and his face changed. "I can't let you take the infant in a pod," he said. Nora stared at him. "What?" The pressure drop on launch. He was not being cruel. His voice was tight and sorry. "It's too much for a baby that small. His lungs can't handle it. He won't survive the launch sequence." Nora stood very still for 1 second. The line pushed behind her. Another pod launched with a bang that rattled her teeth. "Then what do I do?" she said. It was not really a question. She already knew there was no good answer. The crew member opened his mouth and then closed it again. He had nothing. He looked at Sam and then looked away because some things are too hard to look at directly. Nora stepped out of the line. She walked to the far wall of the bay where the emergency communication panel was bolted at eye level behind a thin sheet of protective glass. She broke the glass with her elbow, pulled the panel open, and stared at the scanner screen. The ship's systems were failing one by one, but the scanner still worked, and it showed her exactly what was in the surrounding space. One vessel. Close. Maybe 4 minutes away at current speed. She read the signal signature and her stomach went cold. Dragon military class. Not just any ship. A war carrier. The largest and most dangerous type of vessel the Dragon fleet built. The kind of ship that other ships moved away from. The kind of ship that had ended wars simply by showing up. Nora looked at Sam. He was looking back at her with those calm dark eyes, one small fist pressed against her collarbone. She opened the channel. Her hands were shaking. The smoke was getting thicker. Another explosion somewhere below her made the floor jump under her feet, and she grabbed the panel to stay upright and kept talking. "This is Engineer Nora Webb of the colony ship Ardent Star. We are on fire and breaking apart. I have a human infant. He is 8 months old. I cannot put him in an evacuation pod because the launch pressure will kill him. I'm not asking for anything for myself. I am begging, whoever receives this message to please take this child. His name is Sam. He is good and he is calm and he has done nothing wrong and he deserves to live. Please." She stopped talking. Her voice had broken on the last word and she did not try to fix it. The channel was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that Nora started to think no one had heard, or that no one was going to answer, or that the scanner was wrong and the ship was actually farther away than it looked. Then a voice came through. It was deep. Not like a human voice is deep. Deeper than that. The kind of deep that you feel in your chest before you fully hear it with your ears. It was the voice of something very large and very old and very used to being listened to. "Bring the infant to the forward dock. You have 8 minutes. That was all. No questions. No conditions. No back and forth." Nora ran. She ran back through the smoke and the red lights and the groaning walls. She ran up a maintenance ladder because the lifts were dead. She ran down a corridor that was so hot the metal door handle burned her palm when she grabbed it, and she ran through it anyway. She counted the seconds in her head and kept Sam pressed tight to her chest with both arms and did not slow down for anything. The forward dock was at the front of the ship, and when she got there the boarding ramp was already down and a Dragon vessel was locked against the outer hull. Nora had never been this close to a Dragon ship before. It was enormous and dark and the metal looked different from human metal, Heavier, older, like it had been forged a very long time ago and had seen things she could not imagine. She walked up the ramp. At the top stood a dragon. 3 meters tall, maybe more. Chest scales the color of burnt iron. Gold eyes that did not blink. There were scars along her jaw, old and pale, the kind that only come from fights that were very serious and very close. She wore no expression that Nora could read. She simply stood there and looked at the human woman and the infant, and the weight of her gaze was like standing in front of something ancient that had seen empires rise and fall and was not easily impressed. This was Draven. Nora did not know her name yet, but she would learn it later. Everyone would. Nora walked up to her and held Sam out. Her arms were shaking. Her eyes were burning from the smoke. She had nothing left to say and no more arguments to make. She just held him out and looked up at the gold eyes and waited. Draven looked at Sam for 2 seconds. Then she reached down with both large clawed hands, slowly and carefully, and lifted him out of Nora's arms. Sam looked up at the enormous face above him. He reached out and wrapped his whole tiny fist around one of Draven's claws and held on. Draven said nothing. She turned and walked back into her ship, the infant held carefully against her chest, and the heavy door closed behind her. Nora stood alone on the ramp with her arms empty and her ship burning at her back. She did not know if she had just made the best decision of her life or the worst. She did not know what would happen to Sam, or where he would end up, or what kind of life a human child could have aboard a dragon war carrier. She only knew that he was warm and he was held and he was alive. For now that was enough. The door sealed shut behind Draven with a heavy sound that echoed through the corridor. She stood still for a moment, not moving, not speaking. The infant in her hands was so small that she had to think carefully about how to hold him. Her claws were built for gripping weapons, for climbing rock faces, for things that required strength and force. They were not built for this. She adjusted her grip slowly, moving her fingers one at a time until the small body was resting against her forearm, supported and steady, pressed gently against the warm iron scales of her chest. Sam looked up at her. He did not cry. He did not make the high panicked sound that Draven had been told human infants made when they were frightened. He simply looked up at her face with his dark eyes, wide and calm, studying her the way a person studies something they find interesting rather than something they fear. Draven looked back at him. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then footsteps came down the corridor. Her second in command, a broad-shouldered dragon named Wex, turned the corner and stopped dead when he saw what she was carrying. His eyes went from the infant to Draven's face and back to the infant again. Behind him, 2 junior crew members had followed, and they stopped just as fast, and the 3 of them stood in a row in the corridor looking like they had walked into a wall they had not seen coming. Wex opened his mouth. Draven looked at him. He closed his mouth. She walked past all 3 of them without a word and continued down the main corridor toward the interior of the ship. Her footsteps were steady and even. She did not walk differently because she was carrying something fragile. She simply walked, and the crew she passed along the way moved aside, and every single one of them stared, and not one of them said anything, because there are certain moments when the look on a commander's face tells you very clearly that questions are not welcome. The medical bay was 2 levels down. Draven went there first. The ship's medic was a thin, older dragon named Sev who had been patching up crew members for 11 years and who was very rarely surprised by anything anymore. When Draven walked in and set the infant carefully on the examination table, Sev was surprised. He looked at Sam. He looked at Draven. He picked up his scanner without being asked and began running it slowly over the small body, his expression shifting from shock into focus, because Sev was a professional and professionalism was something he fell back on when the world stopped making sense. Human infant, he said mostly to himself. Approximately 7 to 9 months old. Mild smoke exposure. Slightly low body temperature. He paused. Hungry. Fix it, Draven said. Sev looked up at her. I don't have human infant supplies on a dragon war carrier. Then find something that works, Draven said. You have 1 hour. Sev looked back at Sam, who had grabbed the edge of the examination table with both hands and was trying very hard to pull himself upright and failing, and kept trying anyway. Something moved across Sev's face that was not quite a smile because dragons did not smile, but was something in the same direction. I'll figure it out, he said. Draven stayed while Sev worked. She stood at the edge of the room with her arms crossed and watched every move the medic made. When Sev managed to produce a warm liquid mixture that was close enough to human infant nutrition and carefully fed it to Sam using a small cloth, Sam drank it with great seriousness and then made a face that caused Sev to make a sound that was almost certainly a laugh before he controlled it. Draven watched all of this and said nothing. Later, when Sam was warm and fed and had fallen asleep on the examination table with one fist pressed under his cheek, Sev straightened up and looked at his commander. "Can I ask," he said carefully, "what the plan is?" Draven was quiet for a moment. "The plan," she said, "is that he stays alive." Sev waited to see if there was more. There was not. He nodded slowly and began cleaning up his tools, and he did not ask anything else, because 11 years with this commander had taught him that she said exactly what she meant and never more than that. Word had spread through the ship by the time Draven carried Sam back to the command deck. Ships are small worlds and small worlds have no secrets. Every crew member aboard the war carrier knew within the hour that Draven had taken a human infant off a burning colony ship and brought him aboard, and the reactions moved through the crew in waves. The older soldiers were uneasy. They had fought humans in the border conflicts. They understood humans as opponents, as diplomats, as difficult people who asked too many questions and never accepted a straight answer. They did not know what to do with one that was 8 months old and currently asleep against their commander's chest scales. The younger crew members were something else entirely. Draven noticed it first on the evening watch, when she was standing at the main navigation console with Sam resting in the crook of her left arm. A young crew member named Finn, who was barely 2 years into his service, drifted closer to the console than his station required. He was trying very hard to look like he was doing something important. He was not doing anything important. He was looking at Sam. Sam woke up, looked around, found Finn's face nearby, and stared at him with great intensity. Finn stared back. Sam reached out toward him with one open hand. Finn looked at Draven. Draven looked straight ahead at the navigation screen. Finn looked back at Sam, then very slowly and very carefully extended one finger toward the small reaching hand. Sam grabbed it with his whole fist. Finn made a sound like something had surprised him from the inside. He stood very still, his finger held in the grip of something that weighed almost nothing, and his expression was one that Draven had never seen on a soldier's face before. It was soft and unguarded and completely genuine, the face of someone who has just been trusted by something that had no reason to trust anyone. Draven looked at the navigation screen and said nothing. But she had seen it. She had seen the same thing on Sev's face in the medical bay. She had seen it on the faces of the crew members in the corridor. She had felt something close to it herself, standing in the dock, when those dark calm eyes had looked up at her with no fear at all and the small fist had closed around her claw. She had been a commander for a long time. She had led soldiers through things that broke most people. She knew what it looked like when something changed a person permanently, quietly, without asking permission. She looked down at Sam, who had fallen back asleep against her chest, his fist still loosely curled where Finn's finger had been. She had made her decision the moment she lifted him off that ramp. She had not needed time to think about it or reasons to justify it. Something old and deep and certain had simply told her what to do, and she had done it, the same way she had always made her best decisions. Without hesitation. Without a single word. The first time the battle horn sounded, every crew member on the command deck flinched. It was a training drill. A standard morning alert that the ship ran 3 times a week. Every dragon aboard had heard it hundreds of times and still felt it in their bones when it went off. A deep, long, shaking blast of sound that filled every corner of every room and rattled the metal walls and made the lights flicker for half a second. Sam laughed. Not a small laugh. A big, full, delighted laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep in a baby's stomach and had no filter on it whatsoever. He was sitting on the navigation console where Finn had placed him moments before, and when the horn blasted he threw both arms up and laughed so hard his whole body shook. The command deck went completely silent. 11 dragon soldiers stared at an 8-month-old human infant who had just found their most serious piece of military equipment to be the funniest thing he had ever encountered in his short life. Then Finn made that sound again. The surprised one. From the inside. Then someone else laughed. Then someone else. Within 30 seconds the command deck of a dragon war carrier was full of laughter, real and unguarded, the kind that a crew only produces when something is genuinely funny and nobody is trying to be dignified about it. Draven stood at the far end of the deck with her arms crossed. She did not laugh. But the corner of her jaw moved in a way it did not usually move, and she turned back to her navigation screen just a little too quickly. After that, the battle horn became Sam's favorite thing on the ship. The crew figured this out within a week. It started with Fun, who discovered that making a small version of the horn sound with his own throat caused Sam to immediately stop crying. He told the night watch. The night watch told the second shift. By the end of the second week there were 6 crew members who had quietly learned to make the sound with varying levels of accuracy, and they deployed it like a tool whenever Sam was unhappy, which made them feel useful and made Sam feel entertained and made Sev, who witnessed it from the medical bay doorway one evening, feel something he could not name but that was very warm. Sam conquered the crew member by member. It was not a fast process. It was very thorough. There was Sergeant Borel, the largest fighter on the ship, who had a face that had frightened new recruits for 15 years. Sam had no knowledge of this reputation. Sam saw a large creature with interesting armor and reached for the chest plate with both hands and absolutely refused to let go. Borel had stood completely frozen for a full minute, arms out to the sides, not sure what to do, while Sam explored every groove and edge of the armor with the focused concentration of a small scientist. After that, Borel checked on Sam every single morning. He would never explain why. Nobody asked him to. There was the ship's cook, a quiet dragon named Reth, who had spent 3 weeks carefully developing a food mixture that Sam would actually eat without making the face. When Sam finally ate a full portion and then grabbed the bowl and tried to put it on his own head, Reth went back to the kitchen and stood there for a while with his back to the door and his shoulders doing something that might have been quiet celebration. There was the navigator, old and serious, who had charted courses through dangerous space for 20 years and who allowed Sam to sit on the console and slap the star charts with both open palms. The navigator told anyone who asked that the infant was not a distraction. He said this while watching Sam with an expression of complete and total fondness. And then there was Wex, Draven's second in command, who had been the most uncertain about the whole situation from the beginning. Wex was practical and careful, and he worried about things like regulations and protocols and what the Fleet Council would say when they found out their most decorated war commander had a human infant on her command deck. His resistance lasted exactly 19 days. On the 19th day, Sam crawled across the floor of the command deck, reached Wex's boot, pulled himself upright using Wex's leg, looked up at the large dragon above him with enormous serious eyes, and said his first clear sound that was not a cry or a laugh. It was not a word. It was a short, soft sound, low and rounded, that did not belong to any human or dragon language. But he said it directly to Wex. Just to Wex. Looking right at him. Wex stood very still. Then he reached down very slowly, and picked Sam up with both hands and held him at eye level and looked at him for a long time. After that, Wex stopped worrying about the Fleet Council. Draven watched all of it and said very little. She had placed a sleeping mat beside her command chair in the 3rd week without announcing it or explaining it. She simply had it brought in one morning and set down, and nobody commented, because the crew had already learned which things Draven did that were open for discussion and which things were simply facts. At night the ship ran on a quiet skeleton crew, and the command deck was dim and low and steady. Draven would pace the long corridor that ran beside the deck, back and forth, slow and even, with Sam pressed against her chest scales. She made sounds while she walked. Low sounds that started somewhere deep in her throat, not loud enough to carry far, not sharp enough to be called growling. They had a rhythm to them, a slow rise and fall, like something between a rumble and a melody. Sam slept to those sounds every night. The crew members on night watch could hear it faintly through the walls. None of them ever mentioned it to Draven directly. But more than one of them had quietly admitted to each other that the sound made the night watch feel less long. It was Fun who asked the question that everyone had been thinking. He asked it one afternoon when the deck was calm and Draven was standing at the console with Sam balanced in the crook of her arm, and the question came out simply and directly the way Finn's questions always did, because Finn had not yet learned to be careful enough to keep them inside. "What do you call him?" he asked. The deck went a little quieter. A few heads turned slightly without turning all the way. Draven did not look up from the console. She was quiet for long enough that Finn began to regret asking. Then she spoke, low and even, the way she said everything. "Small fire," she said. Finn looked at Sam, who was currently trying to fit his entire fist into his own mouth with tremendous concentration. It was the most accurate thing anyone had ever said about him. Nobody on the crew used any other name for him after that. Not because Draven told them to. Simply because it was right and everyone knew it was right, and some names just fit so perfectly that nothing else makes sense once you have heard them. Small fire. That was who he was. Sam was 2 years old when he learned to walk properly. He had been attempting it for weeks, pulling himself up on anything he could reach: Borel's leg, the navigation console, Finn's tail, the edge of Draven's command chair, and then taking 2 or 3 fast unsteady steps before sitting down hard on the floor. He never cried when he fell. He would sit there for a moment, look at the floor like it had done something personally offensive, and then grab the nearest surface and try again. Draven watched this process with the focused attention she usually gave to battle planning. The crew watched it the way they watched something they could not stop even if they wanted to, which was with great investment and very little pretense of doing anything else. Boral had quietly cleared a section of the lower deck of anything with sharp edges 3 weeks before Sam took his first real steps, and had told no one he had done it. Reth had started making Sam's meals slightly thicker so they were easier to manage with small unsteady hands. Wex had written 3 different versions of a report to the Fleet Council about the infant's presence aboard and had sent none of them. Life on the Iron Meridian had arranged itself slowly and without any formal discussion around one small human who weighed almost nothing and controlled everything. Then the message came. It arrived on a Tuesday, which meant nothing to the dragons but which Sev noted later with the kind of detail that people remember about bad days. It came through the official fleet channel, marked with the seal of the Galactic Council, formatted in the cold, precise language that official things always used, language designed to sound like it had no feelings because the people who wrote it did not want to be argued with. Wex read it first because he was on duty when it came in. Then he read it again. Then he walked to Draven's quarters and knocked, which he only did when something was serious. Draven read it once. The message was not long. It did not need to be. It stated that the human child designated Samuel Webb, currently aboard the Dragon war carrier Iron Meridian, was to be transferred immediately to the human diplomatic vessel Fair Reach, which would be in range within 48 hours. It stated that the child's continued presence aboard a Dragon military vessel was an unresolved diplomatic matter that required immediate correction. It stated that full cooperation was expected and that any delay would be noted in the official record. It did not say please. Official things rarely did. Draven set the message down on her desk. She sat with it for a while. The room was quiet. Through the wall she could faintly hear Sam on the other side on the command deck, making the sound he made when he was trying to get Finn's attention. A short repeated sound, half word and half noise, that meant nothing in any language but that Finn always responded to anyway. Draven stood up. She walked to the communication console in her quarters and opened a direct channel to the Galactic Council chambers. Not a reply message. A live channel. A request to speak in real time, to whoever was currently sitting in that room, which was a thing that commanders of her rank were permitted to do and that almost none of them ever did because it required standing in front of the full council without preparation and without a script. The channel connected after 4 minutes. There were 9 council members on the screen. Human and dragon both, because the council had been mixed for 30 years, which was supposed to mean cooperation and usually meant argument. They looked at Draven with the careful neutral expressions of people who had been in many difficult meetings and had learned to show nothing until they knew which way things were going. Draven stood straight. She wore no extra armor. She had not prepared notes. She simply stood in front of the screen in her regular commander's uniform and spoke in the common tongue so that every member could follow without translation. She did not shout. She did not threaten. She spoke quietly at the same pace she always spoke, which was slow enough to mean that every word was chosen and none of them were accidents. She said that she had received their message and that she understood what it asked. She said that she was not standing before them to refuse their authority, because she respected the council and had served the fleet for a long time and intended to keep doing so. She said she was standing before them because she believed they deserved the full truth before they made a final decision, and that the full truth was something the formal message had not considered. She told them about the dock. About a human woman with a burning ship at her back and a baby held out in shaking arms and a voice that had broken on the last word of a transmission that asked for nothing except that someone keep a child alive. She told them that she had not consulted protocol in that moment. She told them that nothing in any regulation had told her what to do. She told them that something older than regulation had simply told her to reach out and take him, and she had, and she did not regret it. Then she told them what had happened after. She told them what Sam had done to her crew. Not through any plan or intention because he was 2 years old and had no plans, but simply by being what he was. She told them that her soldiers, who had fought in 3 conflicts and who trusted nothing easily, had opened like doors. She told them that the most feared fighter on her ship made funny faces to stop an infant from crying. She told them that her medic had spent 3 weeks on infant nutrition because he refused to give up until he found something that worked. She told them that her second-in-command, who worried about everything, had stopped worrying about this completely after one small sound directed at him from the floor. She told them that humans bond without condition, without reason, without calculating whether the thing they are bonding with deserves it or can give something back. She told them that her crew had not known this before Sam. They had known humans as opponents and as diplomats and as complicated people across a negotiating table. They had not known this. She paused. Then she said the last thing. She said that taking Sam back now was taking back the lesson after the class had already changed everyone sitting in it. She said she was not asking the council to give him to her permanently. She was asking them to wait, to let him grow. To let him one day make a choice with his own voice. She said that if he chose to leave, she would stand at the door herself and she would let him go. But not now. Not like this. Not as a line in a diplomatic message. The council chambers were quiet for a long time. The vote took 6 hours. Draven did not watch it. She went back to the command deck and stood at her console and did her work, and Sam sat on the floor near her chair and stacked small objects on top of each other with great focus and knocked them down and stacked them again. Wex brought her the result in person. She read it, set it down, looked at the navigation screen. Good, she said. That was all she said. But that evening, when the crew had heard the news and the ship had settled into its night rhythm, Draven paced the long corridor with Sam against her chest, and the low sounds she made were slower than usual and steadier than usual, like something that had been held tight for a long time had finally been allowed to rest. Every crew member on the Iron Meridian stood a little taller that night. Not because they had been told to. Because their commander had walked into the hardest room in the galaxy with nothing but the truth, and the truth had been enough. 14 years is a long time. It is long enough for a baby to become a boy and a boy to become someone who stands straight and speaks clearly and knows exactly who he is. It is long enough for a war fleet to change the way it thinks about a species it once only understood as an opponent. It is long enough for two civilizations that had spent decades being afraid of each other to sit down in the same room and try, carefully and imperfectly, to do something different. Sam was 16 years old. He was not tall the way dragon soldiers were tall, but he carried himself in a way that made people look twice. He had dark eyes that were calm and steady, the kind of eyes that took everything in without showing panic, and he had a habit of going very still when he was thinking hard about something, which was a habit that everyone who knew him recognized immediately because it was not a human habit at all. He had learned it from Draven without either of them noticing. He was fluent in 3 dragon dialects and 2 human languages. He could navigate a star chart by memory. He knew how to run a damage report on a carrier-class vessel and how to make Reth's infant nutrition mixture from scratch, which was a skill he had learned the story behind only recently and which had made him laugh and then go quiet in the way he did when something moved him. He had spent 8 years aboard the Iron Meridian and 6 years at the Joint Human-Dragon Academy on Reach Station, and both places had shaped him in ways he was still discovering. He thought in 2 languages simultaneously. He dreamed sometimes in Dragon tongue and sometimes in English and sometimes in a mixture of both that had no official name. He felt most comfortable in rooms where both species were present, which was something most people could not say, and which was exactly why he was standing where he was standing now. The Summit Hall on Reach Station was the largest room he had ever been in. It had been built specifically for this occasion, which said something about how seriously both sides were taking it. The ceiling was high enough to accommodate the tallest dragon delegates comfortably. The floor was a pale gray stone that caught the light evenly. There were seats arranged in 2 broad sections facing a central speaking platform, and every seat was filled. On the left side sat the human delegation. 40 representatives from the Colonial Assembly, in formal dark clothing, sitting very straight. Nora Webb was in the 3rd row. She had gray at her temples now and fine lines around her eyes, but she sat with the same quiet steadiness she had always had, the steadiness of someone who had once run through a burning ship without slowing down and had carried that quality with her ever since. On the right side sat the dragon delegation. 30 commanders and council members in full formal armor, their scales catching the light in dark metallic colors. Draven was in the front row. She wore her commander's armor, the real one, the one with the old repairs along the left shoulder from a conflict 15 years ago. Her gold eyes were forward. Her posture was exactly what it always was, straight, still, present. She had not looked at Sam yet. She was waiting. The room was quiet in the way that large important rooms go quiet when something is about to happen that everyone understands is going to matter. Not the silence of emptiness. The silence of held breath. Sam walked to the center platform. He stood there for a moment without speaking, looking at both sides of the room with the same calm, unhurried expression. He was not nervous. Draven had told him once, when he was 10 years old and afraid of speaking in front of the academy, that a room full of eyes was simply a room full of people who had not yet heard what you had to say. He had never forgotten it. He used it every time. He began to speak. He spoke in the common tongue first, clearly and without rushing, so that every person in the room could follow. He said that he had been asked to speak today because he was trusted by both sides, and that he wanted to start by saying that this trust was not something he had earned through any particular achievement. It was something he had been given, freely, by 2 sets of people who had decided to love something small and defenseless and human without being asked to and without expecting anything back. He talked about growing up between 2 worlds. He talked about what it felt like to learn 2 languages at the same time, to think in two ways, to understand a joke in dragon tongue and then translate not just the words but the whole feeling of it into English and find that it still worked, that something in it was the same. He talked about the things that were different, the ways the two species ate, slept, moved, argued, showed affection, showed anger, and he talked about the things that were the same, which were more than either side usually admitted and which he had been collecting his whole life like someone collecting small stones that each proved the same point. He talked about the Iron Meridian. He talked about Boral, who had cleared the deck of sharp edges before he could walk, who had never told anyone he had done it, who Sam had only found out about 2 years ago from Fun and who Sam had called immediately and who had been very gruff about the whole thing in a way that meant he was deeply moved. He talked about Reth, who still sent him food on his birthday every year, packaged carefully for long-distance travel. He talked about Wex, who had become something like an uncle in the slow, quiet way that people become important to you without there being a single moment you can point to. He talked about Sev, who had figured out infant nutrition in 1 hour with no resources and who Sam privately believed could do anything. He talked about all of them. Then he stopped. The room was very still. Sam turned. He turned toward the right side of the hall, toward the front row, toward the gold eyes that had been watching him from the moment he stepped onto the platform, steady and quiet and present the way they had always been. He spoke in dragon tongue. He said it slowly and clearly so that the human side could hear the shape of it even if they did not know the words, and so that the dragon side could hear it in the language it deserved to be said in. He said that 16 years ago a woman put him in the arms of a stranger and trusted that he would be safe. He said that the stranger had not hesitated, had not asked questions, had not calculated or considered, had simply reached out and taken him and carried him and kept him and fought for him and raised him, not because any law said to, not because any treaty required it, but because something deep and true and certain had simply known what the right thing was. He said, in the common tongue now so everyone could hear, "She is my mother. And I am proud of it." The hall was silent. Draven did not move for a long moment. Her gold eyes were on Sam and Sam's eyes were on her and the rest of the room seemed to exist at a great distance from that single line of connection between them. Then, slowly Draven lowered her head. Not the way soldiers lower their heads to a superior. Not the formal bow of ceremony or protocol. Something much quieter than that. Something that came from a place that had nothing to do with rank or duty or anything that could be written in a regulation. It was the movement of something full. Nora Webb pressed her hand to her mouth in the third row and closed her eyes. She had thought about that dock for 16 years. She had thought about the burning ship and the shaking arms and the voice that had broken on the last word of a transmission that asked for nothing except that someone keep a child alive. She had wondered every single day whether she had made the right choice. Sam was standing on a platform between two civilizations, speaking two languages, carrying two worlds inside him like they had always belonged together. She had her answer. The treaty was signed that afternoon. Both sides called it a historic moment, which it was. The speeches were recorded and the signatures were formal and the occasion was everything that a peace summit was supposed to be. But the room remembered something else. The room remembered a boy who stood between two worlds and called both of them home, and a dragon who had once carried something no bigger than her fist through a dark corridor making sounds that were not quite growling and not quite singing, and who had never for a single moment needed anyone to tell her that it was the right thing to do. She had known. From the very first second, standing on that dock with the burning ship behind a shaking woman and a calm-eyed infant reaching up toward her face. She had simply known.